The news of the day, sad news. Tim McCarver, our friend, just one of the all-time great Cardinals. What he meant to the game of baseball as a player, as a catcher for Bob Gibson and later Steve Carlton, but also one of the most heralded baseball announcers of all time. So if you look at Tim McCarver's life, and he passed away in Memphis today at 81. If you look at his life, I mean, he signed with the Cardinals right out of high school at age 17. In fact, made his major league debut at age 17. Got a bonus of $75,000. That's a huge amount of money at that time in 1959. And, you know, starting with that season with the Cardinals, he was involved with Major League Baseball as a player, and he played a long time, and then as an award-winning and acclaimed broadcaster that, just did, I think, 24 World Series, among other things. So Tim McCarver was in the game of baseball as a player and as an announcer from 1959 through 2019. That was his final season behind the mic with his friend Dan McLaughlin. And those two had a wonderful time together. So, I mean, it's amazing you think about all the people that Tim McCarver, all the pitchers that he caught, all the broadcasters, the play-by-play men, some of the best ever. Joe Buck, Jack Buck. I mean, I could start a list and just keep going. Tim McCarver would be the first to tell you he had a wonderful life. He had an absolutely wonderful life. His life was joy. And a lot of it, most of it, 90% of it, involved him on a daily basis being attached to the game that he loved so much. But he also was a bit of a Renaissance man. I mean, he recorded an album of jazz vocals. He hosted TV shows. He was a well-read man who could talk books and history, and particularly Civil War history. This man had one of the most curious minds, always anxious to learn, always took what he learned and turned it into great stories. I just don't really know what to say. I mean, there's a lot to say, but I don't know how to sum this man up. But I loved him and going to miss him because when he entered a room, or he entered a ballpark, or he entered a broadcast booth, or he was down by the dugout, everybody lit up. He just had that impact on people. So it's a sad day. I mean, I was led to believe that he's been in somewhat declining health. He had been slowing down. He didn't want to broadcast after 2019. Certainly didn't want to get in the middle of the pandemic and all that. So he just kind of, he made his stops back in St. Louis for the annual Hall of Fame induction ceremony. And, of course, he's in the Cardinals Hall of Fame, and I'm glad that they did that. It was well-deserved. We're going to talk about a lot of that today, too. I think we know him, and I think this applies more to people of a certain age. I think we know McCarver. A lot of people, high percentage of people, know him best as a broadcaster because, his actual playing career ended in the 70s, late 70s, maybe 1980 was like his final time. He played 6 games. And became one of only, at that time, I don't know how many it is. But right now, he's only one of 29 players in the history of the game to appear in 4 decades. In his case, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So he hadn't, been on a field playing since 1980, and so many people got to know him through his work as an analyst, and one of the best of all time. And one thing that I think gets lost a little bit, and, I'll make sure to talk about this today just because it's fun to relive all of his just outstanding things he did as a St. Louis Cardinals catcher. I mean, really, really a underrated player in a way. I mean, the Cardinals will always be known. You had Ted Simmons, Hall of Fame catcher. Yadier Molina will be a Hall of Fame catcher. But, my goodness, Tim McCarver in his peak was just simply outstanding. Not only just catching Bob Gibson, and then later on Steve Carlton, 2 different times with the Phillies. But if you look at some of the seasons that Tim McCarver had offensively, when the Cardinals were winning the World Series in 1964 and winning it again in 1967, where he finished second in the league MVP vote to his teammate Orlando Cepeda. And then in 1968 as well, when he caught 24 out of 34, the 34 starts made by Bob Gibson the year Gibson set the record with a 1.12 ERA. But you look at McCarver during the peak. I mean, one year, he's a catcher, but he led the league. I think this was 1966. He led the league in triples with 23, which is amazing if you think about it. So I'll get into some of the specifics, but I guess my opening comment, other than expressing, sadness and also, speaking for a lot of people, say we're going to miss him. We're going to miss that voice, his presence at a ballpark. But also, what an incredibly versatile career in which he drew acclaim in just about anything that he got involved with. But I don't want to lose the baseball part. I mean, he was so important to the teams that won the World Series in 64 and 67, and the team that went 7 games and lost to the Tigers in 68. He made his mark as a catcher in a way that lasts, because when he was inducted in the Hall of Fame, it sort of reintroduced him to people that were too young to have seen him play in a Cardinal uniform, and we all learned about him and every side of this man's career concerning baseball. So, Jim Hewer, your thoughts?
There's so much there. In terms of numbers of him on the baseball field, the fact that a catcher led the major leagues double digits and triples one year is an accomplishment all to its own. In an era of the 60s where you could argue some of the greatest players that the game's ever seen played during that era. And I think that's an incredible thing. Broadcasting-wise, let's just face it. I mean, there's a certain age group, and part of that was through my growing up, later years, adolescence in baseball. He was part of that. He was part of the canvas of baseball on TV for me. It was him, and it was with Jack, and then it was with Joe Buck, and he was just part of that. Every time it was, hey, Tim's there, and there were times Tim would get on your nerves, and there were other times you go, he's telling you a great story that and nuances of the game that you just don't know about, and he's just multi-talented. I think he's the first catcher I remember, and that was a personal catcher for Steve Carlton. That's the first time I remember of any pitcher going, okay, this is my catcher. Every 5th day or 4 days back then, he was going to catch, and he was just going to catch Steve Carlton, which spoke volumes. The other thought about this as a catcher, I heard him tell this story once, and the reality is he probably caught the 2 greatest sliders ever in the game. One from Bob Gibson from the right side, and the other from Steve Carlton on the left side. You can make that argument. And apparently he was at a speaking engagement one time, and he was talking about Carlton, and he just said, yep, it's the best slider in the game there ever was, and I was privileged to catch it with Steve Carlton. And he said, basically, when he was done speaking, Bob Gibson was at this event and sought him out and ran over and grabbed him and goes, what do you mean greatest slider you ever caught in the game? I mean, he was a great teammate. Everybody who was a teammate of his loved him, and he could tell some great stories. He'll be missed, but he is, like you said, he had everything. He could be a player, he could be a teammate, and he was a great broadcaster.
He was a writer, he was a singer, he was a host.
Amazing.
A historian, and he left his mark on so much of this game. It's just there's a lot of greatness if your career in baseball is in effect confined to just playing the game, but he touched it and enhanced it in so many other ways. I'll say this: I want to talk about a little bit about the baseball part, but I was when I heard about this, I said this is kind of overdue, but I want to take a look at something, because this had to be one of the great postseason performances by a Cardinal. That includes all Cardinals. That includes, you name it, from Stan the Man all the way down to Albert Pujols in terms of the generations. But if you think about what Tim McCarver did in let me make sure I got my stuff here. Let me find my notes. what he did in 1964. The Cardinals beat the Yankees in 7 games, and Bob Gibson started, I think, 3 of those games. And, in the World Series, I'll get to the Gibson-McCarver thing in a minute, but in the World Series in 1964, McCarver went 11 for 23. He hit 478. His on-base percentage was over 550. Slugging percentage was over 700. His OPS was over 1,200. He had a double, a triple, a homer, and 5 RBIs. His 3-run homer came in the 10th inning at Yankee Stadium in I think it was game 4, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm wrong about that. I was scribbling quick. But he hit a 3-run homer at the top of the 10th to break a 2-2 tie and give the Cardinals a critical win over the Yankees I'm pretty sure it's game 5. And then they came home and they won it in the 7th game. But he drove in a run in the 7th game, too, part of a 7-5 victory. And, the Bob Gibson part, of course, Gibson in that World Series, pitched 27 innings. He won 2 of his 3 starts, had an ERA of 3. And then, Steve Carlton caught him again in 67, where Gibson in 67 with the Vive Alberto's team winning the World Series, second in 4 seasons. 3 earned runs in 27 innings plus 26 strikeouts, had ERA of 1 in that World Series. And in 68, even though the Cardinals came up short in Game 7, again, we're talking 27 innings, 5 earned runs, a 1.67 ERA. So Tim McCarver caught every single postseason start made by Bob Gibson. And Tim McCarver did not hit in the 67 World Series, but he hit a ton again in the 1968 World Series. So as a hitter, he was dominant in 64 in that World Series. And he had one of the biggest hits certainly in this series, and there were others. The home run off, Barney Schultz, I think it was, by Mike Shannon. It's a situation. Well, it wasn't Barney Schultz. I'm spinning my tail around. I apologize, but he was behind the dish for all 9 of Bob Gibson's World Series starts, and really, those were Gibson's only postseason starts because there were no other rounds in those days. 81 innings, a 1.89 ERA, struck out nearly 30% of the batters he faced in that very famous Game 1 of the 68 World Series. Bob Gibson set the Major League record with 17 strikeouts, and McCarver was behind the plate. Gibson pitching to McCarver in that game, and the scenes, the black and white game film, so to speak, and it's still in great shape. You can probably see it on YouTube. I don't know that there's ever been in the World Series. I don't think there's ever been a better pitcher-catcher combination. Those guys were like a two-man symphony, the way they were working in sync. I mean, it was just a beautiful thing to watch. So imagine, catching Bob Gibson every postseason start the man had, but also in 2 of those 3 World Series, doing a tremendous job as a hitter, a really important bat in the lineup. And I just think that part needs to be stressed. Like, how many huge moments this man was in terms of his impact on Cardinals baseball as a catcher, as a player, as a team leader in the 1960s. That just can't be stated enough times. Just how good he was. I mean, 21 postseason games, he hit .311 for the Cardinals. Tim McCarver did. And he slugged .500. And his OPS was .865. I mean, that's 21 postseason games. This is a guy, well, he's a catcher, He's a catcher. I don't know if catchers were expected to hit all that much in those days. But he hit better than any Cardinals catcher in postseason history. I'm talking about the team's postseason, at least in the post-expansion era. The 21 postseason games he played in, he hit safely in 16 of the 21. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but you mentioned that He was Steve Carlton's personal catcher. He was also Bob Gibson's. Only it didn't work out. It wasn't like that in the beginning, and I was surprised to see. But I think it was injury related. I was surprised seeing 68 that Johnny Edwards. I think Johnny Edwards maybe caught Gibson in 10 starts, but I think McCarver was kind of beat up and dealing with some stuff. But Gibson at one point went to Red Shandies and said, "Look, man, I want McCarver behind the plate, period." And he got his wish, and then. What they were able to do, again, 64, 67, 68. 64, Johnny Keane was a manager, but when, Red was there with those two great teams, 67, 68. Gibson basically said, that's my guy. I want him behind the plate. So, yeah, think about that. Think about his hitting performance in the postseason for the Cardinals. Big piece of 2 World Series winners. Think about, however, the role he had catching Bob Gibson and sort of helping Gibson along the way. And the bond that they formed. It was pretty tough tandem battery to beat, pitcher-catcher battery. That's you can't. I don't think you can top that one. That's just my opinion. And then he goes to Philadelphia, and while he was not there for the entirety of the 72 season when Carlton went 27-10, he got traded to Montreal during that season. He returned later to the Phillies and became his personal catcher for sure. And Carlton had a great record when McCarver was behind the plate. I'm repeating myself because I'm just so excited to pay tribute to Tim McCarver and sort of the overlooked part of his career, the profound impact he had on this franchise as a baseball player, as a catcher, and well-deserved being in the Cardinals Hall of Fame. But we're just going to miss him. We're going to miss every way that he impacted and influenced and touched this game. 81 years old, listen, had a wonderful life. It just still, the guy was so full of life, so full of energy, so curious, so active, so into wanting to learn more and explore different thoughts about baseball. I mean, just the mind never shut down. So when someone passes away at 81, you say, well, he had a good long life. And it's true. He had a great life. But it still seems like he's gone too soon because of the incredible amount of energy that he brought to every day of his life and that intellectual, curious, driven to learn mind of his too. Very, very unique guy, wonderful guy. Loved him. Just absolutely loved him.
I can take us back to that Game 5 if you want.
Sure.
Here it is.
3 balls, 2 strikes. McCarver the batter. There's the stretch by Miklasz. Here's the pitch. There goes Grote. There's a drive way back. It might be out of here. It could be. It is a home run. Tim McCarver being congratulated by everybody. A long drive into the lower section in right field. And the Cardinals have taken a 5-2 lead. McCarver's first World Series home run.
Unreal,
That's
and to hear Harry Carey too. It makes it even better. It just adds to it. So, if anybody would like to talk about Tim McCarver and share your thoughts, whether you're old timers, whether you're young guys, young women, it doesn't matter. Hit us up with a text message. We'd like to have your recollections. 855-282-8255, 855-282-8255. But so glad that he finished his broadcasting career in St. Louis. I think it started in 2014. He had worked with Fox through 2013 and announced his retirement from Fox, basically announcing it ahead of time, like he was going to finish out the season. But 2013 was final year. And then Dan McLaughlin and some others convinced him to come to St. Louis and kind of finish, where he started, this time as a broadcaster. And, he did it in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 6 good years. And, he didn't do a full menu. He did, 35, 40 games a year, something like that. But I always thought it was delightful. And I know, I would actually talk to Dan McLaughlin during some of those games, just via text message, because you could just hear the joy that the both of them had working together. They had a ball. They had a great time. And that was, and this is no disrespect intended to anybody else, But hearing Dan McLaughlin and Tim McCarver work together for those years, it was just joyous. It was just a wonderful thing to listen to because they had such a great time. And that's what baseball needs, people really having a good time watching it on TV. At the ballpark, it's easier, but watching it on TV. Yeah, and McCarver knew it too. He could get on people's nerves because he wanted to explain everything. And, I know that about myself too. Talk. People were saying, hey, we like you, but dude, can you just shut up, please? I get it. But he would break things down every which way. Someone said famously, you ask him what time it is, and he feels like he has to explain how the watch was made, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he also had one of the great moments, I think. It gets overshadowed with the Kirk Gibson home run in '88 and all that, and I understand that. But one of the great moments he had was the 2001 World Series, Diamondbacks-Yankees, Game 7 in Arizona. And Joe Torre moved his infield in with Mariano Rivera on the mound. And, of course, the Diamondbacks were threatening. They had the winning run in scoring position. And Tim McCarver said it. He called the shot, so to speak. Who the hitter was, it wasn't Counsell, was it? It was the left-hand. Oh, Luis Gonzalez, I believe.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. McCarver called it in advance. He said, just as a great observation, he said, the way that Rivera's pitch moves, a lot of times the hitters, I've seen it, he said, I've seen it a million times. A lot of times all hitters can do is kind of fight that thing off and they get a little piece of it. And, if you play your infield in, a lot of times where a hitter gets a piece of it, he sends his little flare in the short center field over the infield, and no infielder can get to it, no outfielder can get to it. So he was of course he did it more eloquently than that, but he was basically saying, offering a warning, I don't know about this because I've seen a lot of guys just hit one off their fist or at the end of the bat, they barely get any of it because the pitch is so great. And the best they can do is kind of bloop it somewhere. So if you play your infield in, there's a chance this man's going to be able to work in on your hitter and get that hitter to knuckle one out the left field or whatever, and no one's going to be able to get to it even though it's a little duck. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly how they won the World Series with that hit. So he called that in advance. And, again, I did a shoddy job of replicating what he was saying. But it's not like I have it. It's not like I'm working from a script here, So
I can play it for you if you like.
Well, you want to play it? Here we go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Here it is. Yeah.
The one problem is Rivera throws inside the left-handers, and left-handers get a lot of broken bat hits in the shallow outfield, the shallow part of the outfield. That's the danger in bringing the infield in with a guy like Rivera on the mound.
Floater, center field. The Diamondbacks are world champions.
Yeah, there you go. So again, I apologize. I'm just pretty jacked up today. So I didn't look at the sheet to know that we had that.
No, I just found that one. That was not on my sheet. So we got some other things, but that one.
No, but that's baseball analysis at its best, where he was so well versed in his knowledge of Rivera, how his pitches move, the tendency of left-handed batters to fight it off and just get a little piece of it to be able to loop it out in the center field, left field, short right field, wherever, and. He called it. I mean, he called it in advance. I mean, seconds after he, in effect, foreshadowed what a really good possibility of something like that happening, it happened. And it doesn't get any better than that. That was just outstanding work. I remember watching it and thinking, man, it's like McCarver predicted the future. It's like he was down in the batter's box. He knew how a good chance this thing would end, and he did. So, just great. Just great. Nothing else to say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
One of the things about him, like you said, I mean, because most catchers, they understand everything that's going on in a game. And because of his position, and that's the beauty of his analysis. I mean, he would bring things up to you, go, I didn't see that, or I wasn't aware of this. And right then and there, he said, well, here's something to think about. He always gave you something else to go, oh, this is something to think about. And, I just felt he made you a smarter baseball fan when you really got to listen to him, and he had the time to explain it to you. And to your point, I mean, he could do everything, and it was fun. You mentioned this time with Dan on Fox. I thought that was gold every time they got together, and Dan was so good at just kind of, I'm not saying poking him, but every once in a while he'd say something, and he'd just let Tim talk, and he'd explain things to you. Or he'd just have some fun. One of the more funner moments, I got this, I need to play this. It's about him and Dan talking about birds as athletes, because you never knew what you were going to get. This is just gold here. So I want to share this.
Please.
Now, how in the world would the birds know they're starting to circle around Wrigley?
We've talked about that before, have we not?
Well, it's the 8th inning, and it's coming up on 4.5 hour game, where some games could be 2.5 hours, and they know the 8th inning.
Yeah, but the birds know better about rain delays and rain than we do. They can sense it. I mean, you got to understand it. You know that.
I don't care about the rain delay. I'm talking about how they know in the 8th inning to come around here.
Because they know it's been a long game. This game started at 1:20.
How would they know?
It's 5 o'clock. They're birds. They're smart. They're the greatest athletes in the world.
Birds are the greatest athletes in the world.
That is correct.
It's a fact, huh?
It is a fact. I don't want to get into an ornithology discussion with you, but birds are the great. Name a better athlete than a bird, than a bald eagle. Let's just say
Secretariat.
Start with that. No, get out of here. Birds could beat Secretariat running backwards or flying.
But you have totally missed the point. Totally missed it.
No, I haven't.
Has nothing to do with the rain delay. Has nothing to do with how athletic they are. How they know it's the 8th inning.
I'm a fair man, so why have I missed the point?
How do they know it's the 8th inning, whether it was the 8th inning in a 2.5 hour game or a 4.5 hour game?
They're not only good athletes, they're baseball fans.
I'll say it again. What is wrong with you?
Oh, that was no. He knew how to get. He knew how to nudge him and get him gone.
Yep.
Dan did. Yeah. And McCarver loved it. That's the thing. He loved it. He when that they had a little system going. When that twinkle in Dan's eye, and I think Dan maybe literally would kind of give him a little nudge, like, all right, I'm gonna throw something at you here. You don't know what it is, but. Let's see what you got. And he would do that. He would test him on the fly with that stuff. But that wasn't actually – I thought that actually was an interesting point that Danny Mac made because it's true. You'd be in Wrigley Field watching those games, and I saw so many of them there, with the Cardinals on the road. And it was always funny when those birds would begin to sort of convene in that area. And it's like, well, how did they know that the game was close to completion, Yeah, maybe they saw people leaving the ballpark, but there are a lot of times there'll still be people in the ball, a lot of people in the ballpark. What kind of radar do they have? Say, yeah, we're going to be able to go in there and, help ourselves with popcorn and, hot dog buns, pieces of that, got thrown on the field or just kind of the wind took something, How did they know? Well, this thing's just about over. We better get going. How did they know? It's really a great. It's a crazy good question because it's one of those things I never even thought about, and I was in that ballpark 100 and some times.
I love that back and forth because they're baseball fans.
I know.
Right. That's great.
So those two were really a lot of fun working together, and I know Dan gave some comments to Dan Caesar, STL Today. You can read his comments. I mean, Dan's. Needless to say, is really saddened by this because I think he had more fun working with Tim McCarver than he ever had in a broadcast booth, and that is not meant as a slight to anyone else. I just know how Dan felt about that because I'd hear about it. He was like a little kid. He'd be so excited every time he knew he had a series with McCarver.
Oh, and he would, he was not bashful about saying, he goes, I love doing these games with Tim. I mean, and who wouldn't? I mean, it's gold just to listen to him.
Yeah, 24 World Series. Gosh almighty.
Isn't that crazy?
And that doesn't even include all the NLCS, ALCS, right? It doesn't include all the other all-star games. I mean, man, he worked such a long time with Jack and then Joe Buck. I mean, that's just amazing. Just amazing. He won Emmy. He won like 2 or 3 Emmy Awards. He was a 2-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion. He won a couple book awards. I mean, he won the Ford Frick, which it's basically a Hall of Fame broadcasting award, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just a long list of these achievements. And I don't want to forget, or I don't want to lessen the baseball part, because it was pretty good. It was pretty damn profound. It really was.
Oh, 100%. You know, the broadcast side of it, which we were just kind of mentioning. I know Ken Rosenthal was on MLB Network today on the radio side, and he had a couple things to say about Tim McCarver and his impact on Major League Baseball and on through the television. And we're going to share one of these comments here with you.
It's a big loss, really, for the entire game. And I know Tim hasn't been as active in recent years. I believe his last year broadcasting was for the Cardinals in 2019. But at the same time, this is a legend. This is a guy who's enshrined in Cooperstown in the broadcast wing as a past winner of the Ford Frick Award. And really, you can tell me better, guys, but it seems to me it's fair to say that Tim changed the entire way baseball games are analyzed on television. He was more critical, more humorous, more observant than almost anyone who's ever done the job.
Pretty profound.
He never held back, like telling what he perceived to be the truth about this guy made a mistake, or this guy didn't know what he was doing, or this manager, I don't know what he was thinking. But he would break it down and give you a really good explanation that wasn't hot air. It was based on all of his knowledge of the game, especially as a catcher, where you have to see everything. You're like in charge of the whole field in a lot of ways. So, no, he was very outspoken and candid, and there were no shortage of players and managers, maybe even front office people who from time to time would get really mad at him. And Tim, that didn't silence Tim, because Tim also praised people because he'd get excited by their talent and their decision making and how they helped their team win a game. That kind of thing made him very happy to talk about. He played it straight, and that's all you should ask. There's too much now, especially in local broadcasting, where it's kind of mouthpiece work, and it's like, I can't say that. Here's what they're thinking. Oh man, I'm really, they screwed that up big time. But I just gotta be polite. I can't really go after anyone. I mean, there's way too much of that everywhere, and that's why I think a lot of people, even though if he babbled too much or whatever, sometimes people would say, man, okay, we get the point. I think people respected his candor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's that also that it's one thing to be candid if you're just kind of like talking to talk, but there was a purpose to his candor, and the truth was backed up by his expertise and his vast knowledge of the game, his vast experience of the game, not just as a catcher but as a broadcaster. So, the guy spent a lot. Man, there's not too many people that spent so many years in a ballpark. When you divide it, the first half as a player, the second half as a broadcaster. I mean, I'd like to. There's no way for me to do that, but I'd love to see a list. I'd love to see a list like games, major league games, including broadcasting.
Oh,
but what made him rare is he had a lengthy career as a player to go with it. He's almost hit 20 years, I do believe.
I know. I could not find the audio, but I know towards the end of his time in Philly, he actually would do. He was still playing, and he would do the Star of the Game broadcast on the radio side. And I couldn't. I've heard it before, and I couldn't find it before to get ready for today. But I know he would interview, like I think one I heard where it was Mike Schmidt hit a big hit to win a game, and on the radio side, the Star of the Game was catcher Tim McCarver interviewing Mike Schmidt for Star of the Game, other than an actual broadcaster. I mean, he started while he was still playing. I remember watching him at WOR with the New York Mets broadcast when he was covering that Mets group as they started to catch fire. I mean, he was so gifted, and he could do anything that you put in front of him. I mean, he was just super talented.
I mean, I'm going back to his candor, because there's so much to Tim McCarver and his careers, his multiple careers. He got fired by the Mets after the '99 season because so many players were ticked off that he would speak the truth, and they wanted someone to kind of shine their cleats for him, and believe me, there's plenty of guys doing broadcasts now. They're happy to do that. He was just going to tell the truth. He was going to talk about what he saw,
Mm-hmm.
and you always hear me use or frequently use the phrase, diaper baby. Well, the diaper babies with the Mets didn't like that. How dare somebody tell the truth? He's supposed to be a cheerleader.
Right.
So, yeah, good for him. And you know what? He didn't care one bit when he got fired by the Mets. He wore it as a badge of honor, as he should have.